planned here for today is to take all this amazing information, and I mean that sincerely, the phenomenal presentations across the board all day today. Kind of just wrap it all into one. I'm going to be asking our presenters to kind of weigh in on some of these, just to sort of integrate the pieces that we've heard today. This will also be an opportunity after this to ask questions to the TAC, and then more broadly from anybody who wants to ask questions. Again, people on Skype can type their questions anytime. A lot of the stuff Jackie presented, all the data gaps, so we're not going to reiterate that here to a great extent. So we may not need, may get out here a little early, what I'm getting at. But I don't want to take the time just because we have the time, but I do want to go through it and kind of wrap this up. This is the part where hopefully we come up with some sense of where are we, what do we need to do, and how are we going to do it. And there's a lot of different options for that. So let's just dig straight in here. My first question is about today. If there is a spill today, a large spill of heavy oil, with the technology, the information the equipment infrastructure we have. So I'm looking to the panel, Jim, maybe you talked about all the sonar equipment, the different types of detection things, and the one clamshell dredge in Long Beach. So where are we today? There's an incident. Are we 24 hours from having everything on site? That was a number I heard. Are we 48 hours, 72 hours? What is the panel, what all our presenters, so this is open to all presenters. I'm going to put it on you first because you may have the most information. Where are we in terms of right now? Not where we want to be, but right now.
I think you'll definitely have the assessment moving forward within 24 hours. You'll have that equipment there. And you'll be looking at the options based on that assessment. You have, MSRC and others have this capability within State of California. You can move equipment rather quickly. But there is a logistical side of setting everything up with my limiting factor is storage. Where you're going to find, I work all around the U.S., so that's one thing that you have to think about is disposal. So yeah, I think with it, optimistically, there's rules and regulations in the U.S. that require responders to be there within 24 hours. They've had to show that to the Coast Guard, and they get tested and reviewed by the Coast Guard to do that. So I'll end my comments with this typical attorney answer is, it depends. So what's the volume? What's the characteristic of the oil? What's the sea state? Those types of things.
Well, I'm thinking through the process of coming up with the plan of operations. Think about, what I thought about is, okay, what's going to happen? When we have an oil spill, there's very little detail known, including is it a floater, is it a sinker? You've got a problem to respond. And with the mechanical capability, the response capability in general, it's already amassed. That response is going to start immediately. And as it's going to be a floating oil incident, you're not going to realize that you've got a submerged oil problem until sometime into the response. And I think one thing I took away from the discussions here today was that the assessment, figuring out what you got and what you're going to have to do evolves. It doesn't just happen at the stroke of midnight. So things will start moving, but what pieces do you really need and where are they? The logistics of it, it's going to take some time to sort out.
Yeah. In the little ops job aid that we've been, the very first thing we say is, stand up a sunken oil detection delineation characterization group responsible for methods evaluation as soon as it's determined that there's a risk of oil safety. I think, I know you're kind of focusing a little bit on, equipment and those kind of things, but, the peopleware is always as important so that they can then evaluate the appropriate types of equipment that need to be mobilized. And the second thing, another point it says, include equipment redundancy alternatives, because just as Steve said, you go in on scene with one mental model, and then over time you have to develop another mental model about how well it's behaving and for the appropriate technique for mitigation, so that you can then start mobilizing the payment recovery resources.
Right. So if you, if for instance, you know you're going to have a slurry oil that you know is potentially heavier than the receiving waters, then your response is going to evolve much differently than for a persistent floating oil that may pick up sand and sink a week later or several days later. And then you're going to want to know maybe more quickly what the nature of the oil is, the characteristics, and how it's going to behave, and try to think through the mental process and the conceptualization of how it might behave. And that's going to, and you're going to stand up this sunken oil evaluation assessment team, but if you're just thinking about a persistent heavier oil that you would expect to float for the most part until it actually starts picking up sediment on a sandy beach, then maybe you don't have to worry about that unless you expect it to hit a sandy beach or have some sediment interaction you're going to worry about.
You know, thinking about inland situations, one of the things that, if you guys haven't read the NTSB report on the NFO Kalamazoo, the conclusion report, it's a very well written report. It's giant, but it's online. But it's very insightful. The conclusions are really good. So maybe a question for the FRT folks here from OSPR. When I read that and looked at it, it took them days to figure out that it was sinking. Do we ever in the field think, hey, we should go out and check, do some polling, find out if the stuff is sinking as an inland setting pipeline release, where there maybe isn't, as we all know, information available for a day or two. They're going to say there's not very much a spill, and we're going to recover it all. Right? But it might turn out to be 1 million gallons and sinking. So, have you guys ever come across, when we get out here, let's quickly sample the bottom? Or
I think it's more after release and you're not seeing what you're expecting to see, then you start thinking, maybe it's doing something else. And I've had a sinker spill where it originally floated, and it wasn't sediment mixing, it was just kind of a waste oil product. And then we started looking on the bottom, and that was where we found it. Affected a different cleanup.
Part of it, I think, is just getting some confidence early on that you know what's spilled in the first place. Right? That'll help you kind of figure out what path you're going to follow, at least initially, or at least until you start seeing weird stuff going on.
So is there some initial sampling you should be doing and put that in place real quick?
Source sample?
Source sample somehow?
Or just try to get a chemical assay of what was being shipped.
I liked all those photos where somebody took a sample and went in a jar and poured it. So
right.
It did. That seemed
something simple like that can be
practical.
Well, I was on the National Academy's committee that did the dill bit evaluation. And if you're interested in diluted bitumen as a product, that's another really good resource. And we had a really good guy who was president of a pipeline company for a while. He retired. And I really, being in the marine side for so long, I get A crude oil, that's A crude oil. But I tell you, anything comes in a pipeline, as Gordon said, here is a blend. There's you go to Oklahoma, Cushing, Oklahoma, and you see all those tanks. They don't keep them all separated. They take a validation sample before they put it in the pipeline so that they can convince the FAA to show the buyer that they've met their specifications. And so one thing that we recommended in our committee was that validation sample be, or that batch of oil that gets released, that information gets provided to the response as a way to, we can't get a source sample, we can't get a fresh source sample, but that might be another source of information about to better predict how that oil might behave once it gets more.
I think that's a good point. I picked up on Jordan referring to looking at the safety data sheets for products. I am pretty sure that the person, particularly who bought the oil or sold the oil, has got an assay available.
Yeah.
And I don't recall in drills where we really asked for that kind of information.
I oftentimes do, just because I know situations going to ask us for weathering estimates and such. But I'll usually go to safety because they usually have the SDS, and then I'll start chasing down to see if someone has an assay for that oil that we're talking about at the drill. But
That
trying to do that in actual
to
response
think
might be tougher.
So
Yeah.
this is something we've been thinking about a lot lately because we're kind of trying to update our whole oil database product. One issue is that the information about the oil that the refiner wants to know isn't always the same as what we want to know, try to predict its environmental response. months, but it's still a whole lot better than nothing. And nothing is what we have most of the time. And the truth is that the oil companies are really, this is proprietary information, really tightly. We heard about that this morning. And I mean, I remember actually, I was trying to chase down in the Refugio spill through, we know a lot of people in the industry are involved on the response side, and they were kind of trying to make connections with me so I could actually talk to somebody at the refinery and get some information. They did not want to want to give anybody anything. We had to take samples and, run it through our lab ourselves. So that's something that could happen from the regulatory side is, some requirement that shippers of oil make this data available the second they spill it. And actually right now BSEE is kind of looking at increasing their regulations for the offshore platforms that they regulate, saying this data has to be made available. In fact, they're talking about saying that they have to give it to BSEE ahead of time. And it remains business proprietary until it's spilled, but then BSEE will have it and be ready to put it out there when we need it.
We're going to get there to some of those recommendations. Bear with me. There is a method of magic or madness here. So just looking at response at this time, right? We were looking at here's what we have now. So I'd ask you now to speculate or to talk about what is ideal. What's different than what we have now, where you'd say this state is ideally prepared to deal with non-floating oil? Technology people?
Well, a lot of it comes back to some of what Jim said, is there are parts and pieces out there. But right now for a surface spill, there's a trailer sitting out there with a skimmer, with a boom, with everything there. You put it on the trailer and you're gone. There's nothing like that for this stuff. They're taking the piece from here and a piece, and it's there at different places, possibly at different locations, but now you're going to assemble it. So the first thing is trying to think, in my mind, is trying to get all that stuff that you need in the right place, at the same place, on the same container, ready to go for what you need to do. So again, it's out there, but you're going to be piecemealing it, and also his company may have a couple of the pieces, but another company may have another. So depending upon who's doing what, we have. Oh, you have it. Okay, sorry. But I think that's a lot of it. When people say, "Can you do this?" I said, "Yes," but it's just everywhere.
You can say something.
Well, you have to, in the U.S., you have to accept something that hasn't really been talked about, but it's called vessel of opportunity, right? So in the oil spill industry, you do have vessels sitting around to use, but in the salvage industry, one of the accepted philosophies is that you use vessels of opportunity. So you don't have salvage ships and non-floating oil detection ships just waiting around the coast to do this. So it will be, that's what we talked about logistics. We have the prepackaged kit for detection with the various tools that can go on a flight and be here in 4 hours, that stuff. And then for the characteristic of the oil, are you going to use divers? Or are you going to use a clamshell? Are you going to, what piece are you going to pull in? And then that's having that system, that logistical network with those contracts in place, knowing that in Long Beach, I can get that clamshell on a truck and it will be here in 8 hours or whatever, that kind of system. And that plan is, they're called planning standards, right? So you have to show the Coast Guard or show the state that you can look at people's plans and you can exercise those and show us that you can do this, whoever is designated to do it. But they're not response standards that you can write somebody a ticket, right? So that's one of in the salvage industry, there's this philosophical discussion. Like in the UK, they have pre-positioned salvage tugs ready to tow a vessel off the docks. Here, you have to call an available vessel of opportunity.
Sorry, are you saying that some of those tools, like that clamshell thing, would go on a vessel of opportunity?
Yes. And then you would have to find one of the heavy lifts.
Because a lot of these vessels of opportunity are not necessarily
available.
or that size.
Right. You need to have heavy lift capability to do that. So you have to have a crane barge that probably a 220-ton manual crane to move the system around.
And a huge vessel of opportunity with enough room on the deck.
A barge with the crane. And then again, storage, whether you allow it to decant and what the procedure to decanting that you will allow. So in the Great Lakes, that was one of my lessons from doing this job in Lake Erie was there's no place to store oil. And I'm prior Coast Guard. I was like, how do we approve all these response plans when when you have no place to put the oil? So we looked for tank barges. We went to Canada, and there were 2, but they were not seaworthy enough to come into U.S. waters. So we had to build our own recovery barge. And that takes time.
Yeah,
It takes days to do that.
So now going kind of back to where you were, so I think there are areas of improvement. I mean, some of the things the notes that I took, the notification of crude, you mentioned why couldn't it be before, Gordon mentioned, could we get advanced notification of what's coming through where? If we knew the particular type of crude or a particular type of vessel or both had an especially high risk in a particular location, and we knew it was coming next week, we could require an escort tug or a parking of something in the parking lot. You'd be ready. We knew it was coming. That would take some sort of legislation, presumably, to get there. Talking about NFO spill kits, the trailers, they don't exist right now. Decanting solutions is what I put down, and that sort of thing. Like, Jackie, you said, there are no off-the-shelf containment things, period. They don't exist. So, I would open it up then to talk about, these next steps. Are these legislative next steps? Are these partner with industry, grant programs? I mean,
Well, can I bring up a fact that, we looked the world over for spills since the 1970s, and there were 38 worldwide that had any documentation that the oil sank.
Right.
And so there's a balance off between risk and the cost of preparedness for those. And that would, there's low frequency, high consequence, but I'm not sure if every spill has its own kind of impacts. But I guess part of my question was, from what Gordon said, it doesn't sound like you don't have too many non-floaters coming into the state. And so how prepared do you have to be? And if people have so much money, go after the more frequent thing, improve preparedness for other things. Have these, there's a lot of tools available now, a lot of technology, and the Coast Guard has the NFO OSPR classification. I guess I'd be tempted to sort of test things out through, we've not had a non-floating spill drill. They're kind of hard to do, but, just to see what people can pull together. I guess, I don't know how much more.
So in the South industry, it's called verification. So we have to have kind of the concept of operation, and we get scenario-based input from the Coast Guard at least quarterly, and we have to respond to that. And we have to show this time there's vessel opportunity here, or we have heavy lift, here's capacity. You could do that for, if you have a facility that manages this, they have to have a plan, they have to have a designated NFO 10. Do a few exercises and see how that would go.
I think it's a good It's a good suggestion. I mean, I agree. It's a low frequency, high consequence situation, but organizations like OSPR are built for the 1%. We aren't for the 99%. It's to exist when there's a time of great crisis. So it is the 1 in a million, but that's why we're here talking about it, to be ready for that sort of issue. But I think drills and exercises kind of gets us started with that, with the discussion, with maybe less financial commitment. I mean, obviously, if you could use all these things daily and charge for them as an OSPR or as a salvage company, you'd already have them and be renting them out every day. If there's not a market for it, you're not going to spend that kind of money. It's going to be all through partnerships. You can still drill partnerships. Your group from Sweden. When's the next flight to get that thing out here? Whatever. Sure.
Well, I was on the National Academies Committee in 1999, the very first non-floating oil, a little green book. I think everybody's seen that. And in that, we recommended that there be prep drills or drills for non-floating oil spills. We did that in 1999, and there has not been one that I know of in the entire United States. So,
well, the OSPR classification said there's going to be government unannounced exercises.
Or,
Yeah.
I think that would be the best way to test the if you're interested in capabilities in California, and companies know that you're going to be testing that part of their plan, then what a way to make sure that they pass their drill. I know you guys have a really nice drill evaluation program that you take very seriously in the state. So see how that works.
We could do the Plains pipeline in Bakersfield.
On the Kern River.
Or the Kern River.
Yeah, which is a high-risk area, no doubt.
But what are you gonna test?
Drill, have a non-floating oil drill.
Are there non-floating oils in Bakersfield?
I thought that's what this gentleman,
So
first from the Energy Commission showed all the data.
Well, the crude by rail coming from Baca and Permian Basin is almost like gasoline. It's so light, so it's not refined oil. The only one that I heard is marginally non-floating is the blue bitumen. And how much of that? I had a hard time getting my hands around how much of the potentially non-floating oils are coming into California.
I did take it, no, it's like 3% or something. It's a really small,
It's very small.
very small percentage. But you could, I mean, all the San Joaquin crude, produced crude, pretty heavy. It wouldn't take very much sediment to sink. Once it's in a pipe, it's a mix, as we heard about today. So that theoretically is lighter material. But we have seen, like what Jack was talking about, the Kalamazoo stuff lower too. I mean, with the fairly small rivers.
That was a little bit, wasn't it?
Yes, the drilling that you
Yeah. And so I can understand the light end qualify. But San Joaquin Valley crude is not going to do that. It's going to slowly weather. It'll probably sink. I think any oil will sink, quite frankly, once you let it weather long enough. So working into that scenario, I think that makes sense. But to start off thinking that you're dealing with the non-floating oil, because you're going to have a surface issue as well with that scenario.
Yeah, the work I did, and I actually want to follow up with Gordon, I have enough to do that, in trying to find straight up sinkers, usage in California.
Well, I think he said that there was nothing in California with an API. So there's nothing that's a straight sinker. But we have had sinking oil when it mixes with sediment.
Well, crude oil, I would agree with that. But some of the
Defined product.
I mean, asphalt clearly is a
Okay, yeah, right.
slurry oil is going to be a sinker. But the crudes, the California crudes are not naturally initially sinking.
That's right. And so it's only all those, the clarified slurry oil, all these, weird heavy things, these are all from refineries. And because refineries are getting more and more gasoline than ever out of cracking everything else. And so the residues are pretty heavy. And, you don't just get asphalt. In fact, I was surprised. He did talk about asphalt. He didn't talk about the heavier cuts. So, nobody in California burns any heavy oils at all. Not all the fuel for vessels is diesel.
Like petroleum coke.
There's bunker fuel, but there's no.
Like an IFO 380 or 580.
Yeah, 380.
380.
You're going to find that.
But then those are floaters. So one thing about the refined products, my experience, all the IFOs, all those 38 studies that we had, none of the refined products were heavy enough. Fuel oils for them. It's the slurry oils, and these are intermediate products that kind of get shipped around for other purposes. Those are the only ones that have API gravities that are really heavy. The IFOs, the API gravities, all of those are, way above 10.
And that could change. I know, like the Santa Maria Phillips 66 refinery, that rail project died, but that, I think their intention was to bring in Utah black wax and some areas that facility is specifically set up for.
Yeah.
Most aren't, but that one is. So, it's possible that it could happen.
Gordon said that Phillips 66 was currently refining, shipping asphalt to Santa Maria or Rodeo or something like that. What did he say?
So the San Francisco refinery from Phillips 66 is actually two facilities. An initial one on the coast of Santa Maria, and then they take the coke out and the sulfur out, and they ship that product up to Rodeo for the refining.
Is the Santa Maria one considered a heavy oil?
It is. They don't make any refined products there, or not gasoline, kerosene, jet diesel, those kinds of things. If they can process heavy oil. In fact, they gave up importing Bakken on that project because they couldn't process it. It would be impossible. It was a no-brainer for them to say. Yeah.
There's a marine terminal expansion for the Phillips 66 in Rodeo. I don't know what that's. Likely that would be something.
So, question on readiness. How do we feel about training? Do we have enough people? And this, yes, it'd be the Osras, but my sense is that you would say yes, you're prepared. How about OSPR? Like I said, do we ask the right questions at the right time? Is there a sense that we need more training to have familiarity with these NFO questions, or does people feel like we're pretty good?
More training.
More training? Well, I mean, you see things elsewhere in the country with higher levels of kind of focus and discussion across, and this I'm talking about the response community, OSROs, RPs, regulators, all the whole gamut.
I'm like the state of Washington, they get a lot of DOBA coming in there because of their right geography. And their area contingency plan, their RRT, they're all very focused on preparedness and planning and guides and being ready, updating all of their response plans and drills. And so I guess, how do you train? I mean, we've done some training here.
Yeah, but a lot of our key staff that are on our field response teams aren't here.
Yeah.
We did record it, so they will all be able to participate.
But you could go through some of the details. I mean, we just did the service. We've had 15-minute talks kind of things. And but not to I hate to say it, but these reports that API pay for, I mean, that's the latest and greatest. I mean, I don't think we've learned anything. We haven't had any sort of particularly informative spills of non-floating oil since then.
Apex.
And then that was in here. Yeah, we used that in there. And so
like state of Washington, they actually did training on this. I helped teach a class. So, and to look at your own policy and how you would do that. Just one example, that what I learned from teaching that class in the state of Washington was they will potentially allow decanting for the first 24 hours, but after that, no. Like there were people in the room that were adamant, we will not do this. And so I try to think I'm pragmatic, and I think, okay, well, let's walk through this. Let's do a tabletop exercise and tell me where are we going to get these assets. We're going to do dredging, or we're going to do underwater pumping. You're going to produce a lot of water. Where are you going to put that?
Yeah, I put in my notes here about MOU, pre-approval for DCAM.
We have MOU with the water board that allows, chime in Kathleen, allows decanting in the area that's already contaminated, it's moved off.
It might be more restrictive if we were talking about non-floating oils.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's floating oils, it's really.
Yeah.
How about in the American River, the side of the river? Does that still apply?
Yeah, because the MOU is with the water board, so it's statewide.
It was originally written just for marine waters,
Yeah.
but I think it would be a case-by-case question. I don't know that the MOU would cover it for inland waters at this point.
The tricky thing there is it's, Jim says it's rate limiting. At some point we shut down the operations because we don't have anywhere to put stuff. That's a bad answer.
Well, I think you got to look at the risk too. I'm trying to think where on the Sacramento or the American River would you have exposure to an NFO spill?
You've got the Kinder Morgan tank farm or whatever. That theoretically, if it went into the storm drains and there was a series of failures to get to the river, I don't have.
All gasoline.
All gasoline, diesel.
Yeah, transportation. So the only way you're going to get an NFO spill in those areas is from a truck.
Mm-hmm.
It's my way of thinking. I don't, unless somebody knows some other way.
Or if there was a rail line that was carrying tar sands that got mixed in sediment.
Which there are none, right?
No, well, actually, so his graphs showed there is some small amount of crude by rail going to Bakersfield, Taft. And then in the most recent month, there was a percentage of that was coming from Canada. And presumably that's coming down the Feather River and then down the Central Valley, or the Sacramento River, upper Sac. So, and it certainly has in the past, meaning like 2 years ago. So, you know, there's that possibility.
I think, again, the risk is low. I think that's one of the things that come out of that. Gordon was very helpful in that. That's terrific. The risk being the likelihood of an incident, because there just isn't, we're not that many opportunities. That said, the consequence is high, so it makes sense to be prepared. And I think this is kind of where we're getting is cheap preparations like drills and exercises and training compared to legislating that you go buy $300,000 worth of equipment. I am not making those decisions. That took that kind of discussion.
So I have a couple of things that kind of crossed my mind when we were having this discussion, well, since the TAC meeting in July where we first talked about this. Do we know enough about, do we have enough information from for other reasons about water flows or higher enough resolution bathymetry or benthic habitat mapping for different areas that might be of higher risk? So you can start answering some of these 5 questions. Do you know enough about I know there's been a lot of like submerged aquatic vegetation surveys and benthic habitat surveys in San Francisco Bay. I don't know if there's other, I don't know where you go to get that, if there's a spill, or can you pre-identify those ahead of time, or questions like that. Just kind of like what maps, what resource information are there about sensitive habitats or water flows or you know sediment accumulation areas in certain river stretches or whatever that you might focus on the different water levels. You have a place to go to get that information. You have contacts or expertise you can draw on. Also, when it comes to questions that we're asked about where's the oil going to go, is a simple final excursion answer. If we don't have if our trajectory estimate is look in the deep spots between here and 4 miles downstream, is that good enough for an operations section chief or a response to make some initial decisions about the degree of how they're going to go about the assessment or whatever? Because I'm not sure that there's a better alternative at this point.
And who is going to be your operations section?
And I'll turn to the FRT. My own experience and response is sort of like your response on the equipment. Much of the data is available in 10,000 different places. Looking on the Feather River, for example, PG&E has to get a FERC license. They do lots of benthic macroinvertebrate studies in that stretch of the Feather River, which is high risk. That data exists. We don't have it.
Right.
You're not going to get it online, but we could get it.
But looking for it and identifying whether it exists or not.
Could is there a good effort to assimilate the data resources? Every flow station, right, that monitors flow, that's always in CFS, which is very hard to use when you're trying to do modeling to make this top velocity. But what would you guys use as full sources for? How fast is the water flowing? How cold is the water? Do we know about benthic macroinvertebrates? Is that?
We have some for some of the water course, the freshwater streams in the state. We have some background BMI data, and so those are very useful when you have a spill. I'm not sure with the flow, and maybe Jackie can answer this. When is it surface velocity, or would you use bottom currents because it's moving in a different way than the faster surface current? So I think we would have some trouble gathering all that data together. We are addressing in sort of a cursory way non-floating oils in the new geographic response plans that we're developing for inland waters, but I don't think we have a solid handle on it, and that may be something that we could look at a little bit more closely. Melissa, did you want to add anything? I only have Northern California.
Yeah, no, I don't think we have a lot of pre-existing.
There's lots of sources, so maybe at least try to get a folder online. Here's all the different things you might use. So we're aware.
The other place, the Arctic Marine Oil Spill Conference that happens up in Canada each year, a lot of the work by Environment Canada over the past 2 or 3 years has been studying the rivers that the Kinder Morgan is going to come over on, and they've done a lot of work with Dilbit and looking specifically at what kind of pebbles, what kind of things are on that and doing not just an ESI, but going into tanks and dropping stuff on things and stuff. So go back and look on that. That their whole past 2 or 3 years has nothing to do with anything except we're not even building it yet, but we don't understand northern Vancouver where we're building this huge thing. And a lot of their work has been looking at that kind of stuff. Toxicity studies.
You kind of brought up the river flow issue, and every time we deal with a spill in a river, we do have trouble really kind of classifying flow. Rivers are gauged all over the place, but you're right, that you get the stage, you probably get discharge, and somewhere there might be a relationship to velocity hidden, and we can talk to USGS, we can talk to River Forecast Centers, we can talk to Corps of Engineers, but we're always kind of scrambling to put that data together when the spill happens. So it wouldn't hurt to, and I don't know whether it's worth the effort or not, but that could be sort of gathered up front more.
Or even maybe potentially deploy a current meter at the time of response. Would that be helpful if you have the opportunity to do that?
Yeah,
Or a
and
series
that's
of
the
them?
capability actually thing where you have something ready to go, and that's technology that's gotten a lot cheaper and easier lately. So.
And you do that in the areas that have the highest risk. You don't need to do every river. It's where your dill bits and the heavier oils are more likely to be handled and spill risk.
Although that'd be good information out of any kind of spill.
Oh, yeah,
So,
exactly.
but if you pipeline crossings stuff would be the obvious place to start.
On the FRT side, I would suggest pushing this out to also the OSPSs and the law enforcement side, because the lieutenants and all the SOCs are going to make decisions based on our recommendations. And this would educate them. And on the OSPS side, finding staging areas and locations and their relationship with OSROs. So pushing this out maybe to FRT meetings or do a condensed version, and inviting some of the OSROs who were involved. And on the drill side, Terry Johnson did a drill probably 5 years ago, a small drill in LA, and it had a non-floating oil as part of the scenario. And one of the ideas was engaging the OSROs and coming up with how we have to develop it, collection, recovery methods. With a fence, with sorbent pads built into it, and dropping it and dragging it. Some of these, basically freelance, whatever would work would work. So it has been looked at very low level 5 years ago in drill.
One thought on that I also found myself thinking about in some of these discussions with some of the techniques seem to be pretty disruptive to the environment. And I think another benefit of having drills is flushing out what kind of authorizations you need doing some of this stuff. I don't think you're going to just turn us loose with a clamshell in San Francisco Bay without having some kind of view.
Some people will be interested.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue. I was looking towards looking at studies and things like that. The ones I had written down from Jack, cleanup endpoints. Do we need to try and work through formalizing some risk-based, in my opinion, cleanup endpoint? What's the right? Where are we headed? If we don't know where we're going, it's really hard to get there. That was one I had. Decant. V-source studies. Also, Jack, you mentioned, what do they actually do underwater? Do they bounce around? Do they come up? Are they configured the right way? Right? It's all about encountering. If we're not encountering, we're not collecting it. Whether it's for Sentinel or monitor or for recovery, we're not, so
we need to develop some, you can't tow them any more than, X knots, and you need this kind of weight, everything else, so that you can, know that they're at least performing the way we have assumed they would be performing.
and even efficacy. So if we had known something out there, see how many passes it took before we got 100%, some sort of thing like that. I wonder from your modeling side, is there something that we could throw out into the spill that would be affected like the oil is affected at the bottom, that would be pinging data back up to you that I've rolled 50 feet or I've stayed in one place, or is there some sort of technology that would help you calibrate the model and provide data for it?
Probably not. It's my fault. Because part of the problem is the oils are all different, and so that's part of our issue. But this is, although the current meter idea, at least better categorizing the flow, would be a good start there.
More thoughts on technical needs?
Yeah, well, again, there's some developments going on up in the Arctic where if an ROV or somebody finds oil underneath the ice, being able to tag it and then be able to track that piece of ice or that oil to something else using RFIs and a bunch of other mechanisms. There may be something that somebody could build, again, sort of small thing, give it a radio signal, could throw in and track, at least tell you how fast things are moving that way. That may be of use for some of the submerged stuff.
Yeah, I know. Cameron, did you get that presentation at IOC? There's a presentation on a new technology for remotely going under ice and recovering that.
BSEE was doing that funding.
That was pretty impressive.
I was struck by the number of mechanical sort of rudimentary, fences and gates and pulleys and springs and buoys and things. I'm curious to know, thinking back to our technology workshop, were there any sort of applied response technologies talked about specific for Category 5 oils?
Not at that workshop, although at yesterday's San Francisco Area Committee meeting, Elliot Taylor did a presentation from Polaris, some research that they've been doing. And they looked at a couple of the dilbits commonly transported through the Vancouver area, mimic those conditions of the Burrard Inlet in-house, basically, and looked at like 3 different stages of agitation on those 2 types of dilbits, and then looked at the ability of dispersants or surface washing agents or in-situ burning and skimming and some other conventional recovery options to affect recovery of that oil. Some pretty interesting results, but we haven't really considered that in California so much. I mean, we have
lifters.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of our response options are probably going to be mechanical in nature. There are some cleanup approaches that could probably be, come from the ART world, but those are going to be the ones we already know about. Surface washing agents or something like that. I don't think there's any magic coming from the ART world.
Lighteners or lifters or something like
bubbles.
that. Yeah. Well, yeah, bubbles.
Well, but that's mechanical. That's not.
One other one I had in potential studies was from your comment, Gordon, on weathering. Give you some more information about underwater weathering of oil.
Yeah, especially those blended oils. It's if you know at least if you know how different Canadian bitumens weather and what diluents they're blended with, then at least you might have some idea of what might happen if some complex mixture of several different bitumens and particular diluent hits the water. But then you're still going to have challenges. But at least you might have a better sense of how big your problem might be. How much time do you have before the thing evaporates? Loses so much from evaporation that it's getting close to.
I think it was during the modeling discussion where you mentioned that some places have much better current, tide, et cetera, modeling than other places. You really have to go in and use what's already there. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that and whether California has good coverage on that sort of basic information.
Oh, boy. San Francisco Bay actually, no cost. That is so much better than it was a few years ago. I think, and in terms of the rivers, and we kind of hit the ones when they happen, so I'm not quite sure what the state is in terms of how well things are matched with where you can go from the gauge and actually get velocity rather than just a discharge. I have no idea actually, but that's one thing that you can kind of do ahead of time actually.
I'm not sure what kind of hydrographic expertise is available at the Department of Water Resources, for instance, river hydrologists that might have the expertise to think through some of those problems or questions. We did have some calls with Randy and one of our recently retired lead trajectory modelers about how do we think through this potential issue of river trajectory modeling. Are there simple ways to kind of take certain basic river information and if you know what the shape, what the river type is and the water level is, can you make some basic assumptions about what the flow is? least a ballpark estimate, a back of the envelope kind of calculation. To give you something that might be useful enough, but the expertise might be out there at different state agencies that might be able to kind of be a part of a special work group to kind of think through some of these issues.
It'd be good. I like the idea of figuring out ways to estimate. You know, I mean, the Feather River runs from 3,000 to 300,000 CFS, depending on the season. Very different response plans that you have to deal with. So if you could at least come up with some thumbnail, today's conditions and today's, I think this would get us close.
Just to kind of calibrate things, but one of the things that Chris mentioned was the subsurface circulation models. So that's not a lot of data to base them on, right? So that you may have a general idea of what the circulation pattern is below the surface, but unless you actually put a current meter in there, you may not know what the scale of that magnitude of that flow is, right? So, especially for a oil in the water column on the bottom, you know, if you don't even have that basic information, it's going to be hard to say how big is your problem, how big of an area do you need to even start detecting do your surveys.
Well, I wrote down all models are wrong.
For some reason, some are more wrong than others.
You know, another thing we discover often is that, you know, in a region, it turns out that someone recently, Corps of Engineers, USGS, state agency, has, you know, been studying that section of river, for instance, because of some other reason. And they might have really detailed bathymetry. There's all kinds of stuff like that. So it might be kind of nice, to, you know, if there's some way to just kind of keep tabs on everything everyone's doing so that you know what's available.
I think in OSPR, the GRPs right now, where they've looked at where areas of highest risk in the north, central, and south, where we have waters and infrastructure and oil. Now let's get all that data. So I think all of the GRP process of optimization right now is going to really help, because you've got to figure out who has the flow data, who has the bio data, or the bentic.
Or you think California rivers would be pretty tightly watched?
Yeah, a lot of eyes, a lot of fishermen, a lot of recreational users.
You know, one thing you talked about the distillation data. You know, if you go to crudeMonitor.ca, they've got distillation curves for the latest. You know, they got historical averages and the latest sample. So for they call it that's kind of funny names. Alberta, they do think these are all crude oils. So you have to search for all these are called heavy, sour, unconventional. That's the Access Western blend, the Christina Dilwood blend, Bow Lake blend, all the ones that were on Gordon's list. There's quite a bit of characterization data out there. So I think you and then
is this the Environment Canada?
Yeah.
No, this is the Alberta carbons.
Oh.
So it's crudemonitor.ca.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got tremendous amount of data for every crude oil that's produced in California and Canada. They have very detailed data on both the latest, they have winter blend and summer blend for all these things. And so you have quite a bit of information about these oil types. And then you can even add a cut, if you want to change your, this one's placed on a certain kind of building cut, but if you, for some reason, think you have a different one or you want to play around with those kind of things, there's quite a bit of data there. And it's very much up to date. But these are only the blends, the crude oil. I call these things engineered crude oils. They're not a crude oil to begin with, but they have been, sometimes partially refined, sometimes blended or cleaned up to everything else, and then turned into a crude oil. That's the biggest problem in Enbridgeville was that for at least a week, Enbridge that this is a crude oil. And here's our generic MSDS.
On the railroads, if it's placarded right, they don't get anything more than that.
That's all you can get.
They literally don't have the information. So the last item, we've kind of covered it around. The last question I have was just on how do we spur innovation? How do we take the polio sponge from an RER Labs idea to a commercially viable product? There's a risk, there's an economics that don't drive us that direction, right? At the moment, there's no big incentive to go out there and spend a bunch of money on inventing the new mousetrap for sunken oil, and yet there's a lot of interest in it, there's need for it, and we'd like to have it. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts beyond what we've already talked about, but any thoughts on partnerships, partnering with RFPs, producers or transporters or technology institutions or grants or regulation? Any thoughts on how we spur innovation?
Or prize.
The X Prize, you know, that it works.
And you know, I have a lot of people who have technologies, you know, I'll do that same thing, you know, they just love to have a place to test it or prove it, or, you know, the induced polarization, I think that's actually a pretty promising technology, but they have knocked on a bunch of doors, but there's, you know, everyone's open and says, come on in on your own nickel. And, you know, they've stopped doing that because, so I don't know, I think, to me, I think it's kind of you know, the RPs who handle those things, they, you can, to me, it's making people prove that they have the ability to be able to do some of these things through drills and exercises. They're the ones that have the money. You guys don't have any money, right?
Does ICOPAR Science Plan have any focus on
They mentioned
Oh,
it.
it's everything. They have, I go,
They mention it.
They mention everything.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was how that was focused on.
Go ahead.
I've encouraged the Coast Guard to, you know, the NOAA study that on sunken wrecks, right? So they just came, they're very slow.
We had 87 priority wrecks we identified.
Right, some of them are leaking. So there's one, the Coimbra, which is off of Long Beach, that just came out. We did a
Long Island.
Long Island.
Sorry, not Long.
Sorry. Trying to get everybody excited.
Yeah,
exactly. Long Island. Yeah. So, but they came out with an RFP, and then we put about a 70-page dissertation together, and then they said, no, we're not going to do it this year. We'll do it next year. But that would, right now, just so, and people don't like to talk about economics, but right now the oil industry's down. So there's a lot of availability of support vessels, relatively cheap. The Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund is fat, following Deepwater Horizon. And there's a lot of leaking vessels out there. So I would think timing in history is good for money's available, low cost assets, go out. And then one of our line items was, what was it, you know? Induced polarization. Was, okay, we can try these new types of innovative technology. They'll give you a real live case study with, you have Coast Guard oversight, and you could have state oversight, and it'll be a real live.
And we've got a great
solution to
place
problem.
that you can to test all these things. We have, it's called the Taylor Energy MC 20 you know, release that's been going on since 2004. Got all the water columns, got all the sediments. There's a jacket over it all, but that's, you know.
And you have a lot of natural seeps in California, some of which are really don't have much of a surface expression. They're really just sort of almost a tar seep at the bottom. And so there may be those were, you got good characterization of those, and they may be good targets, natural targets to play with.
I know, you know, you mentioned it, Ellen kind of talked about it. During an incident, nobody wants to try something new. You know, could OSPR have a role there to say, we are motivated to try something new. We want it to happen. How do we box it in? How do you alleviate, you know, if it goes wrong, right? The RPs are not going to want to pay for it. So is there a structure that you can say, you know, take it off your NRD settlement, or, you know, I'm making that up, obviously. But, you know, is there something we could do to say, when we have an incident, let's try stuff. Let's learn from that and not just keep doing the same sorbents over and over and over and over again.
In the salvage industry, there's a contract, always open form, which is no cure, no pay. So you could set up a similar type of system that, okay, if you have new technology, will you use it? No cure, no pay. You could have some kind of line item in there.
I think there are a lot of entities who want to go to a spill and try their stuff out. You know, all those things you talked about are OMSETs that are challenging.
That's tough.
It is.
Well, it is real tough.
Our city's not real anxious, but kind of.
Nor are the regulatory community.
And because, you know, a lot of times, you know, we'll do a little small science and little experiments. You know, what we've learned about surface washing agents sometimes is that we've got the RRT to approve. Okay, we're going to try surface washing agents, real small scale. You get a bunch, you know, so, but it's just nice ones. Yeah, it's, you know, it's tens of thousands or maybe $100,000. You know, but it's not millions. What it takes to, you know, put all the stuff, the sources up. You know, I think the when I came out from Refugio and we did the multi-beam sonar and the divers, and I bet all that cost at least $200,000 or $300,000. And people said yes because, you know, we had to prove a negative. That was important to everybody. You know, all planes, Unified Command, they all said yes. We want to know. You know, we want to be able to tell people where there's any recoverable sunken oil. And but we use standard techniques. We didn't have to worry about contain or recover it because we didn't find it recoverable.
So,
No, I'll wait a bit. I'll wait
Okay,
until
well,
there's a.
those were the questions I had for the panel. Are there any other questions that people had that felt merited additional discussion at this time? Topics?
Guess I have more of a topic.
Okay, good.
Just thinking about what's been offered as a suggested for next steps or what we need, and then maybe how we could sort of take those next steps. What I hear is that we'd like more training, especially for our field folks, whether they're the environmental scientists or OSPR prevention specialists or the wardens that will be our SOSCs. So it seems like fairly, and this is all sort of putting the risk of a spill aside.
Right.
And just talking about, okay, what can we do that's sort of low cost and will help us feel as though we're prepared for that low risk event. So we could do some training. I think a lot of what's already been generated through the API documents and what was, summarized here today could go out right now to the field team, and that would be really helpful for them. As a next step, and that training could include other Coast Guard, EPA responders, Marine versus non-marine, all that kind of stuff too. So be fairly inclusive, but mostly of the responder community, where you want to kind of get them conversant with these response tactics and then what might apply for the different response situations that they might be in. From that, maybe with that same group, take that ops guide and see what of that can be tailored for California. It may not require much change. It's pretty generic in scope and I think fairly complete in scope. But at least if those same folks that are in that meeting getting the NFO 101 training can go right into the ops guide and say, okay,
Do tabletops.
and then drill on that. It would be helpful to do both sort of training with the RPs in advance and the OSROs probably more particularly. But I think that even better benefit, greater benefit, it would be the unannounced. And only after that would you start thinking, okay, is there something here that remains as a gap that we need to address through bigger response times, additional equipment, kits of equipment, even though it's going to be difficult to put together a kit, of response equipment that will fit all situations. Maybe there's some essential elements that could be going in. It seems like there's that side of it for training and recognition of the issue. And then it seems like there's other stuff from the data mining and display end of things. A lot of this information we're talking about with sort of ESI related or resources at risk related, or where is there a pipeline crossing or a rail crossing or a facility handling this type of oil where we also have sensitive resources. Can we get that mapped into IRMA? All those are fairly low cost things that we can accommodate in-house with the resources we already have, and would get us quite a few steps further, I think, in terms of identifying, okay, and now what are the remaining gaps that we can't identify through training and some better sense of what we're already prepared to do. It seems like in terms of incentivizing and finding bodies to do some of the research that's missing. I mean, it seems like a lot of this stuff, like inland river flow rate, bottom current rate kind of stuff, it just sounds like a grad student project to me. And if we could identify some essential research questions, maybe we could go to NSF and get a fellowship that would pay for a couple grad students, or somebody to go out and get some more of that baseline flow data for us that is currently missing, or other projects that we identify as kind of high priority, but we actually, pay a, master's or doctoral student to go out and do that. And then I like the idea of the X Prize kind of stuff to sort of incentivize industry, because there are fine partners in the response. And maybe that's something where we can get, again, do that as a partnership. And maybe get some help from our NGO partners in terms of identifying funds, and then sort of as a community of response concerned folks, figure out how we go about soliciting projects and awarding prizes and things like that. And I just want to mention that, we would still really, we being Annie and me, OSPR has kind of put together this sort of OSPR internal response technology evaluation system, and by that I mean we've thought about it. We haven't actually done it yet, but kind of built on what we did during Deepwater Horizon, and then probably taking some of the BESI, what are they called?
TRLs.
TRLs, technology readiness level strategies, and combining those in some way, and then doing field testing of the technologies that we think have the greatest merit. Not the testing of everything, but we kind of like to embrace that in the planning realm rather than during response. So to the degree we can get more participation in that as our process matures more, expect us to come out to our response community and our industry partners, our OSPR partners, and make sure that we've got their buy-in to that too. So just a couple of different thoughts along the way of how we can move forward, not necessarily at a high cost, and not necessarily with an eye toward, should we even be doing this? I mean, what's the risk of a spill of this type? At some point, we'll probably have a spill of this type, and we don't want to be caught flat-footed, so I think for fairly low investment, we can take advantage of all the good work that's already been done and to translate it to California. So those are
Good summary.
my thoughts.
Do we have any questions? Any roundtable topics? Do we have any questions on the internet, Jen? Julie, any closing items?
No, I don't think, I mean, we're wrapping up a little early, so I don't have to really mind that particularly. But, I mean, thanks for everyone coming out and participating. Thanks again to our speakers for helping kind of focus. There's an ocean of information, obviously, that's been developed, that having it kind of, focused and delivered in this way is really helpful for us to kind of get our thinking going in terms of what our next steps are. So with that, I think we can.
I had one more question. Sorry, I know it's not very popular, but I was talking to some people in Washington, and they were telling me that I think Washington has felt that the 24-hour response time was too low, and I think some of that was based on wanting to have equipment in the state of Washington, and if it's 24 hours, then you don't really know where it's going to be. But I would be curious to hear what people felt about the specialized equipment that's available now for non-floating oils, and how important it is to have that equipment and, I guess, specialized information as well on site within. Is it going to make a significant difference to have it there in 12 hours as opposed to 24, or in 6 hours, or?
I think you should look at the also in 33 CFRs and salvage and marine firefighting regulations, and they have a kind of a graduated response. So within 1 hour, you have to do a remote assessment. I think that would be a good idea. So you could start picturizing what you have, and then within 3 hours, you have to do this is for a ship structural assessment. The ship has to be started, and so many hours has to be moved. So the whole idea is if they activate the best response, you could prevent pollution, right? You would have it assessed, you would have it supplied, or whatever you need to do to stabilize it to prevent it from getting worse. So if you look at our national contingency plan, it says after 6 flight, defensive actions will begin as soon as possible, right? Stabilize the situation, prevent it from getting worse. That's in our Bible, right? So why not have that within 1 hour? You have to be doing that assessment. I'm sure what's the reporting requirement?
There are other requirements.
It's like
specifically for non-floating oils.
But you would have a kind of an assessment process where you'd start mobilizing those assets. It's a big issue for marine casualty response and salvage because, again, I mentioned this, but most of the time people are in Cambridge. It's like, oh, this can't be happening. No, you have something that overwhelms the crew, or that there's a breach of the pipeline. Within an hour, you got to have a remote assessment completed. Talking to people that have done this before.
California, from what we've heard today, it sounds like we aren't likely, at least at this time, to be dealing with the sinking that straight up just comes out of the container and sinks. So if it's going to be through sediment interaction or other things, there is some time. And of course, what that really means is 24 hours after we ask for it, which might not be till day 3 when we realize it's sinking. So it's actually day 4 by the time we arrived on site.
Again, I would emphasize, don't overlook the existing capability. on the marine side, you've got 2-hour requirements where you've got to have equipment on scene. So you're going to start that assessment, whatever it might be, immediately. Those assets are going to roll, just like with a floating oil spill. I'm sure, thinking through that, there's going to be a component of floating mechanical recovery. If you have a barge that burps asphalt, you can't tell me there isn't going to be an expectation to boom that barge. So your mechanical assets are going to be rolling and there early on.
But the question really has to be, what is specific to non-floating oil? Is there a time element that's vital to having specific non-floating oil?
I mean, a lot of that is really situation dependent, and I think we need to be careful about not taking lessons from lucky situations in the past. Like in the Apex, it took a long time to get that clamshell down. Mm-hmm. As it happens, that river flow is fairly steady and I think dropped a little bit over that time period. If that river had crested during that time period, that oil might have moved again. So, it turns out we had 2 weeks, but you don't always.
And in fact, a few months later, there was another barge spill not too far away where it struck a bridge, and it was during the high flow conditions. The river flow were less than 2 knots during the Apex 35. During this other one, another Apex anyway, the river flow was 7 knots. And the barge hit a bridge and was released into the main channel of the river, and we never saw it. It was like smoke coming out of a smokestack, right?
Is that the one though where the barge ended up on the shoreline and then they did have oil around the?
Oh yeah, but that was just secondary. But the release that was in the river, that's right. Just way, not really, but it actually wasn't. It was a smaller amount, but so sometimes the resources, there's nothing you can do under high flow conditions. All you can do is be able to look downstream where it might accumulate.
I think this is partly a reflection, the uncertainty here is a reflection that there haven't been mermaid spills. I do think, as you say, the Osmo is going to be on site in hours. Suction dredges and bolt dredges anyway are all over the state. They could be on site very, very quickly. Our ability to finesse where we're going and how we're doing it, probably on daylight only, and some things are tricky like that, but there's...
You got to delineate it first. All that recovery stuff, you got to find it first. Mm-hmm. And so the finding is actually sometimes, on the bottom, we have good tools now. If it's on the bottom, we can, find it pretty fast. If it's not on the bottom, that's harder.
Other questions? Tom, any final words?
Thank you.
From the TAC?
Well, I apologize for us not being that well represented.
Well, you're here.
No, very informational, and we really appreciate the effort that everybody's going through it. And I think it has application to the broader community. I think that's one thing you got to think about is how you spread the word, so to speak.
That's certainly come out of it. With that,
I just wanted to touch on a couple things in the very last bit here. We were going to ask the TAC members, whoever's left standing, that maybe this is a question for TAC to take up at a later meeting, but what the TAC feels their additional informational needs. Just figured that we kind of covered the topic well enough in this workshop, and it's a matter of feeding that information out. But if you need anything more in terms of information, help us find out what that is and how to get it to you. We are going to do a briefing on this workshop at the RRT meeting in January, just so that they sort of know what this was about, because it wasn't open to the world. Although I see Susan Crawler was on the Skype for just a little while today. So you may hear more about this again then. I don't know whether the RRT might want to have pull together some sort of workshop for the RRT members at some point. But what we're doing in January is just sort of a summary of this workshop. But hopefully the other Coast Guard sectors will be at that meeting too. So they'll be able to kind of get up to speed with what the rest of us talked about today. We haven't talked about exactly what a report coming out of this workshop would look like, but I expect that we'll do something, and it might be, kind of an overview, the agenda, the one-pagers, access to the other reference material that we talked about, such as the API reports. I don't know exactly, but there may be a workshop report in our future. But I think that was about it. Let me know if you want any of you want access to any of the reference materials. I mean, you'll have the literature cited in the API reports, and that's probably your best library. And those are all generally electronically available.
Will the slideshows be?
Will the slideshows?
I copied them all, and we can probably put them up on our website somewhere.
Some of those things like.
This is the live version too, as well.
And the TAC page.
Yeah.
That's for everything else is the announcement.
All right, well, keep in mind, the most dangerous part of your day is about to begin. So be safe out there, driving home, be kind.
Millions of other people on these wet highways and drive safely. See you hopefully at an exercise.
Thank you.